Dr. Ranjan, you have done extensive work on suicide and its therapy. How can a person having suicidal tendencies do self-management to avoid such triggers?
I'll split this question into two bits about suicide. It's about how do you manage suicidal tendencies and ideations. So we'll talk about those patients who are chronically mentally unwell, and then we'll talk about particular groups of people in the population who are vulnerable to suicide. So let's talk about the patients with mental health problems first. Generally speaking, patients with schizophrenia and bipolar affective disorder, about 10 to 15% of them will tragically commit suicide at some point in their lifetime. So it's a really incredible statistic, this, and I think it's really important to realize that most of the suicides are happening, particularly in schizophrenia, when they're first developing the illness, so that it's a really tricky time for them and they don't know what's going on in their heads. The other time that they become vulnerable to suicide is when they're coming out of the illness, so they're recovering or in the process of recovering. They suddenly realize, oh my God, I've got such a terrible illness. So it's really important to educate the person. So as a psychiatrist, I would like to educate the person. These are the tricky times that you're likely to be prone to suicidal ideation. And if they know, because knowledge is power after all, then they're likely to be able to be vigilant about it. So once they know that this is going to happen, then we can sit and work out a suicide plan with them. So it's about, this feeling will not continue forever. That's absolutely critical to get across, and it's going to be a passing phase. But whilst you're feeling like this, who are you going to turn to? So who are your loved ones? Are there any services such as crisis services or Samaritans that you can ring and keep yourself safe? The other thing some patients do, and I do it with some patients, is lock up their tablets or the other methods of suicide. A very good example which is going on in America right now is the fact that a lot of suicides there is happening through gunshot injuries. And tragically, once you put a gun to your head and you shoot yourself in the head, there's no coming back from it. So in America, they're trying to get legislation to try and separate the ammunition from the gun. And you lock away those two places. And the hope is, because most suicide occurs on impulse, if you lock away the gun from the ammunition, by the time you get the ammunition, the gun, unlock the gun, the suicidal impulses pass. So that's about patients with mental illness. The other bit is about patients who are not necessarily patients, but people in the population who are a little bit vulnerable to suicide. So let's talk about India now, and one of the critical areas is farmers committing suicide. I think the government has a lot to do here, and that is to alleviate distress and poverty. But again, to those farmers, I would like to say that this phase that you're going through could be a very passing phase. And please, for God's sake, remember that when you commit suicide, you're not actually solving a problem, because you're creating another problem for the family that you leave behind. Because tragically, again, suicide is one of those things which is a little bit of a taboo right across the world. And the family, sadly, suffers a lot. And in fact, what most people don't realize is that the suicide rate actually goes up in the family if someone of their loved ones has committed suicide. We don't know quite why that is, but it is a well-known statistic.